Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mandy Nuku and I am the Operations Director for the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to invite our Spanish-speaking community members to click the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose the Spanish interpretation option to hear the form in that language. I will pause for a moment while our interpreter, Rosabel Rice, gives this information in Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenido a este foro. Para los que hablan español que desean recibir interpretación simultánea, en cuanto se habilita ahorita la plataforma de interpretación, pueden ir ustedes al pie donde ven un globito y presionar Spanish o español. O si traen un teléfono celular, van a ver los tres puntitos, buscan la opción de interpretación y van a presionar español y podrán escuchar esto totalmente en español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you all. The League of Women Voters of Boulder County works throughout the year to help empower voters and defend democracy. If you want to lend your time and skills to encourage civic engagement for all people in a nonpartisan manner, please join us. All the information you need is on our website at lwvbc.org. Additionally, we rely on the support of the community to do this work. If you are able, please consider donating to LWVBC on our website or in the PayPal link in the chat. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. For 100 years, we have encouraged informed and active participation in government and influenced public policy through education and advocacy. To remain nonpartisan, League never supports or opposes political candidates or parties. Both LWVBC and the League of Colorado do take positions on ballot issues, either neutral, opposed, or support when it aligns with League positions. That information will not be presented today, but can be found on our website, again, at lwvbc.org under the 2020 elections. Our ballot issue presentations are typically held in person throughout Boulder County, but to observe public health best practices, we're participating online this year. This presentation will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel and linked to our website. I would like to thank the League volunteers who have worked hard researching the 2020 ballot issues and preparing for these presentations to the community. I would also like to thank Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition for their support with translation of the presentation today. And thank you to our interpreter, Rosabel Rice. Our panelists today include Peggy Leach, Deborah Hayes, Catherine Brown, Holly Monkman, and Charles Duché. We will begin today's presentation with a state of Colorado ballot issues and conclude with the 2 Longmont issues and 1 Louisville ballot issue. We will take 2 or 3 questions per ballot issue from the chat as time allows. We ask that you use the chat only for your questions for the presenters today. Now here is Peggy Leach to get us started today.
Thank you, Mandy. So I'll be starting right out with the most difficult ballot issue we have, which was Amendment B, a repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. And by the way, the ballot language does not mention Gallagher. So first, I will go over the slide, and then I will go into an explanation of the Gallagher Amendment and how it works, and then what this repeal would mean. It's a very complicated and confusing issue for just about everyone. So it was referred to the voters by the legislature by a margin of 79-20. It's an amendment to the Constitution because it is repealing a constitutional amendment passed by voters in 1982. Amendment B repeals the provision that requires property tax assessments for residential property equal 45% of total taxable property in the state, and non-residential property equals 55%. The assessed value of the tax is the taxable value of a property, not the actual value. Amendment B repeals the requirement that total non-residential property tax assessment be fixed at 29%. And it repeals the requirement that the legislature adjust the residential assessment rate to maintain the 45-55 ratio. So when the Gallagher Amendment was passed by voters in 1982, the intent was to stop the ever-increasing residential property taxes due to increasing property values. When it was first implemented, non-residential properties were taxable on 29% of the actual value, and residential properties were at 21%. Over the years, to keep the 45-55 ratio, non-residential has remained at 29% per the Constitution, and residential has declined to its current 7.15%. This is because in most years, residential property values have grown faster than non-residential values. So property taxes are dependent on three components: the actual property value, the taxable rate, known as the assessment rate, which is currently 29% or 7.15%, and the mill levy. The assessment rate is the only component being addressed in Amendment B. The legislature also passed companion legislation, which would freeze the property assessment rates for the next 4 years at the current rates of 29 and 7.15%. After that, the legislature can lower assessment rates for either category, but increases will still require voter approval. For next year, the residential rate will drop to 5.88% if Amendment B is not passed. This is a reduction of almost 18%. So the impacts of Amendment B and companion legislation. On residential taxpayers, the assessment rate would stay at 7.15% for 4 years instead of being reduced. If property values increase, this could result in higher property taxes paid by residential taxpayers. For non-residential taxpayers, the assessment rate stays at 29% for 4 years, which is not a change from current law. Local government revenue, and by local governments, I mean schools, counties, cities, fire districts, water districts, those types of things. Amendment B would prevent further decreases in the residential tax rate, thus preventing declines in local property tax revenue. The impact of previous declines has varied across the state, with the largest impacts occurring in areas with slow growth in home prices. These tend to be smaller and more rural areas. Areas with little commercial properties have also experienced decreased revenues. So if passed, Amendment B will prevent estimated cuts to school districts statewide by about $491 million and about $204 million in cuts to county governments. The state government impact. So interestingly, the state government does not receive property tax revenues, but state government spending for schools is dependent on how much funding the school districts receive from their local property taxes. So as noted a minute ago, Amendment B would prevent cuts in local property tax collections for school districts, which would reduce the amount the state must pay. If Amendment B is passed, estimated savings to state government next year is $247 million in school funding obligations. Those in favor say the Gallagher Amendment is outdated and full of unintended consequences. It uses statewide averages of real estate values that ignore the difference between urban and rural Colorado. And by repealing the Gallagher Amendment, we can maintain the funding we need for critical services such as local schools, fire departments, water services, and others. Those opposed say Amendment B results in higher property taxes for homeowners. The current property tax system keeps residential property taxes low. And there are better alternatives to amending the Constitution. Local governments can instead ask their voters to raise tax rates or find other solutions to provide services. These alternatives would allow voters in each jurisdiction to decide for themselves how to best fund services for their community. So I know that was complicated. Do we have questions on this?
I do not see questions just yet, but we'll give people a minute here. If you'd like to type your question for Peggy in the chat, go ahead and do so.
And while we're waiting, I'll mention that there is a registered group in favor, which is called Yes on Amendment B. And there is a registered group opposed called Keep Property Taxes Low. They're both registered with the Secretary of State's office. All right, any questions?
No, I do not see any questions.
Okay, that's great. I think people will probably, well, hopefully I explained it. So now let's see here. I believe Deborah is next.
Did we lose Deborah and Catherine?
On
On the screen anymore.
I don't either.
Yeah, and you know, they were talking about high winds and power outages in South Boulder. They both live there. So
While I'm
Oh, there's Deborah. Coming
okay,
back in.
we'll give her 1 minute to come back on. Someone asked if we had slides explaining the pro and cons. We will just be sharing that information, so we won't have slides for all the details, but I will encourage everyone to either go to our website where the ballot positions are in both English and Spanish in more detail, and also to use vote411.org. You can put in your address and get your personalized information of what will be on your ballot, and the pro-con information is in there as well.
I had a slight power outage. Are you?
We are ready for you, Deborah.
All right. Amendment C, conduct of charitable gaming activities. This was referred by the legislature. It amends the Constitution. So it requires a simple majority to pass, because it would change. Allows the bingo and raffle licensees to hire managers and operators for games of chance. It reduces required period of existence for the charitable organization from 5 years to 3 years. These are bingo games and raffles that nonprofit organizations like schools and churches and environmentalist organizations conduct at public bingo halls. In Boulder County, we have Longmont Bingo, which opened in 1992, and before the pandemic, it was open every evening and Sunday afternoons. Volunteers raised money for school programs, churches, clubs in Longmont, Lyons, Erie, and Frederick. The Colorado Secretary of State regulates bingo and raffles. There's a license fee of $100. The renewal is every year. The nonprofit has to show that it's a bona fide organization in existence for 5 years. And anyone who works at the bingo has had to have been a member. Amendment C proposes 2 changes. First, it would allow the licensed nonprofits to hire managers and operators. They could be compensated no more than minimum wage, which is about $12 an hour. People who are not members of the nonprofit could work at the games if this was changed. Secondly, Amendment C would reduce to 3 years the license, the period of existence for the organization before it is eligible for a license. These changes, assuming that more organizations would be able to apply for licenses, it would add some revenue in license fees, but it would also add to the state's expenses to process the licenses and investigate compliance. Compliance is a big issue because there's a lot of money involved. Those in favor of Amendment C say the proposal would allow more opportunities for nonprofits to run bingo games and raffles as a revenue stream to benefit their programs. Being able to compensate volunteers would help with recruitment and retention of people to work at the game to support the nonprofit. Those opposed to Amendment C say paid workers would take funds away from the charitable organization and thereby increase its overhead costs. This reduces the amount of money available for the organization to spend on its primary purpose. If workers are paid, it's more like for-profit gambling than charitable fundraising. Are there questions on Amendment C?
I don't see any questions just yet, but we're going to give it just a minute here. I think somebody has raised their hand. Let me go back to that. Wayne, you can go ahead and ask your question if you'd like to.
No, that's fine. That was a mistake.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll go ahead and mute you. Any other questions? Okay, I think you got it, Deborah. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen.
Okay, now we hear from Holly Monkman on Amendment 76.
Hey, good afternoon. So Amendment 76, citizenship qualifications of electors.
Goes down, I'll know too.
Oh,
A yes vote will change the Constitution to specify that only U.S. citizens 18 years of age and older are eligible to participate in Colorado elections. A no vote means the language in our Constitution remains the same. This is a change to our Constitution, so it requires the 55% approval to pass. Currently, the Colorado Constitution guarantees the vote to every citizen, and it does not prohibit extension of voting eligibility to persons under the age of 18 or to non-citizens. Now, regarding non-citizens voting, that's not currently permitted in any elections in Colorado, but there are 5 states that currently permit non-citizens to vote in some local elections, such as a school board election or city council. Now, regarding the age requirement, in 2019, our legislature extended the right to vote to 17-year-olds in primary elections if they'll be 18 by the general election. So if this amendment passes, 17-year-olds would be prohibited from voting in primaries again. To put this, some numbers to this, in our 2020 presidential primary in March, the Colorado Secretary of State's office reported that 24,000 17-year-olds were eligible to participate, and a little over 10,000 of them did. And finally, if this passes, it's unclear whether cities or towns with their own home rule charter would be free to establish their own criteria for voter eligibility regarding municipal elections. So this may ultimately end up in the courts as to how this might be applied to home rule cities and towns. Those in favor say that it would prevent non-citizens and undocumented people from voting in Colorado's elections. They also say it would prevent municipalities and counties from extending the right to vote to non-citizens in local elections. And finally, that it enforces the original intent of the Colorado Constitution by setting 18 as the minimum voting age. Those opposed say that this amendment is unnecessary and divisive, and that there's no evidence of non-citizens and undocumented people voting in our elections. And that finally, it would disenfranchise the 17-year-olds just granted the right to vote in primaries in 2019. This is a citizen initiative. The registered group is Colorado Citizens Vote, which is led by a Florida-based 501c4 titled Citizens Voter, Inc. It is on the ballot in 2 other states, and there was an attempt to get it on the ballot in a couple of additional states, but they didn't reach the signature threshold. This has no financial impact. Do we have any questions regarding Amendment 76?
I don't see any just yet. Let's just give it a minute here.
Right.
If someone has a question about something we've already discussed, you can feel free to type it and we can try and add it in towards the end if someone thinks of a question as we go along. So feel free to put it in the chat. Just please reference which one you are asking that about if it's not clear.
Okay.
But I think we can go ahead and move on to the next one.
We'll move back to Deborah with more gambling.
Amendment 77, local voter approval of casino bet limits and games. This is a citizens initiative again. It applies to casinos in Central City, Black Hawk, and Cripple Creek. Those are the only places we have casinos in Colorado, besides the Indian tribal casinos. But those are perfectly legal, but they're not in on this this initiative. Casinos began to appear in these 3 cities in 1991 after Colorado voters approved another initiative to amend the state constitution and allow casinos. They offered slot machines, poker, and blackjack, and the bet limit for the 2 card games was $5. In 2008, voters approved raising the bet limit to $100 and adding roulette and craps. In 2019, sports betting was legalized at casinos and online. So this year, Amendment 77 proposes that voters in the 3 cities should be determining the bet limits and games. Casino rules would be removed from the state constitution, meaning that future proposals would not require a statewide vote. With local voters' approval, the casino could set the bet limit at any amount and could add games. Baccarat has been mentioned. And then Amendment 77 also amends state law concerning how the casino tax revenue is distributed. It'll still go to the community colleges as it does, but they have widened the number of programs. The casino pays taxes on bets minus payouts. And the way it is now, and it will remain, 78% of the tax revenue goes to the community colleges, 12% to Gilpin and Teller counties, where the 3 cities are located, and 10% to the 3 cities themselves. Now, currently, the 78% for the community colleges is designated for supplementing state funding for student financial aid and classroom instruction. Amendment 77 would add programs to improve student retention and increase credentials completion. People in favor of 77 say, 1, voters in the 3 cities know the impacts of casinos better than voters elsewhere in Colorado. Local voters are best equipped to address the community's needs and control what happens there. And 2, the proposal increases community college funding without raising taxes on Coloradans. Increased funding means more educational and employment opportunities that benefit everyone. Those opposed to 77 say, 1, raising or removing bet limits lets people lose money faster. The House always wins. It may increase the prevalence and severity of problem gambling, including financial problems, family neglect, and substance abuse. And 2, expanding casino gambling may negatively impact other communities, but they do not receive the additional tax revenue to deal with additional traffic, intoxicated driving, and other effects. So are there questions on 77?
I do not see any questions just yet. Let's give it a second if anybody wants to type a question in. All right, I think we can move on to the next one.
All right, Charles Duché will talk about Proposition EE.
Proposition EE is taxes on nicotine products. It was placed on the ballot by the state legislature and would pass with a simple majority vote. Proposition EE, if approved, would increase taxes on cigarettes and tobacco products, create a new tax on nicotine products, including vaping products, and distribute the new revenue that is generated from it to expand its preschool programs, as well as to K-12, rural schools, affordable housing, eviction assistance, tobacco education, and healthcare. A yes vote would increase those taxes. A no vote would mean the taxes would stay the same. Earlier this year, the state legislature passed a law to raise taxes on cigarettes and tobacco products and create a new state tax on nicotine products and modify the regulation of those products. This new law takes effect only if Proposition EE is approved by the voters, as all tax increases require voter approval per the Colorado Constitution. Cigarettes are currently taxed at 4.2 cents per cigarette, which amounts to 84 cents per pack for 20 cigarettes. Tobacco products, these are different than cigarettes. Tobacco products include chewing tobacco, cigars, snuff, and are currently taxed at 40% of the manufacturer's list price, which is the price at which the manufacturer sells the product to a distributor. Nicotine products, which include vaping products, are currently not subject to state tax. All 3 of these products are currently subject to a state sales tax, but not a specific tax otherwise. Cigarette and tobacco taxes are required to be paid by the distributor that first receives the product into the state, and they may keep a portion of that tax as compensation for work associated with filing the taxes. The new taxes would increase incrementally until they're fully phased in 2027. To be more specific, in 2021, taxes, if this is passed, taxes per pack on cigarettes would go from 84 cents to $1.94. Tobacco products percent price would go from 40% to 50%, and nicotine products such as vaping would go from none to 30%. By the year 2027, the overall increase from 2021 to 2027, cigarettes tax would go up incrementally to a total of $1.80 per pack. Tobacco products would increase by 22%, their tax, and nicotine products would go up by 62%, that being from 0 to 62%. If approved, the measure also establishes a tax on moist snuff products, which have a tax, but not as much as it would go up. Set a minimum after tax for cigarette consumers, make online sales subject to new taxes, and reduces the portion of taxes the distributor may keep as compensation for the work associated with filing the taxes. Right now, distributors can keep 4% of the taxes. That would go to 0.4%. Also, vaping products would be taxed where they're not taxed currently. The revenue generated in the first year of implementation, which would be the budget year 2021 to 2022, would be approximately $175.6 million. And that would increase up to $275.9 million in budget year 2027 to 2028. How would this be spent? It would be spent on preschool programs, rural schools, K-12 education, housing development, eviction, legal assistance, healthcare programs, and general spending. The majority of the taxes would be used in the first few years, 2021, 22, 23, for K-12 education. It would move from there to preschool programs. Part of this would be an innovative program for preschool, which would be new nationwide, and that would be paying for 10 hours per week of preschool. Therefore, the parents would be able to send their child to preschool at no charge to them for 10 hours per week to prepare them for kindergarten and moving up. Arguments for Proposition EE. One is Colorado has one of the highest rates of youth vaping in the country, and while also having one of the lowest tax rates on cigarettes and tobacco products, and again, no tax on vaping products. This would increase this as the cost of these products as a potential price deterrent. Proposition E also provides for needed funding for education and providing, as I said before, access to free preschool for children, for all children, where it's only provided selectively, like in Head Start programs currently. Arguments against: increasing taxes on products imposes a financial burden for those who consume them, particularly low-income users. Raising taxes would establish a minimum price which hurts business owners who sell these products and might decrease their sales of these products when they are struggling. And the state should not, they also feel the state should not depend on tax revenue for a specific addictive product to fund schools, preschool, and other state services. Are there any questions on Proposition EE?
This is an easy group today. I do not see questions. I will just give it a minute here before we move on to the next one to make sure. But again, as we go on, if anyone thinks of a question, feel free to type it in the chat. And it looks like we can move on to the next issue.
Okay, that's Proposition 113, the national popular vote. A yes vote approves the bill that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor in 2019 that joins Colorado with other states in the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact for election of the president by national popular vote if enough additional states join the agreement. A no vote rejects the bill that was passed and keeps Colorado's current system of awarding all its electors for the president to the winner of Colorado's popular vote. This would pass with a simple majority vote. If approved, this compact doesn't take effect until states with enough electoral votes to reach the 270 threshold have joined. Currently, there are 15 states plus DC in the compact, totaling 196 electoral votes, and that includes Colorado's 9. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact was created in 2006, and various states have been considering it since then. Those in favor say that every vote will count equally, regardless of what state a voter resides in, and that candidates will be forced to broaden their campaigns instead of just focusing on swing states. And once in office, presidents will be less likely to propose policies that favor swing states. And finally, that the winner-take-all system of awarding electors is distorting and it pits states against each other. Those opposed say that candidates will only focus on the most populous states in the big cities, and that this agreement sidesteps the Electoral College, and that instead the Electoral College should be reformed via a constitutional amendment. And finally, that if elections were close, the NPV would lead to recounts and litigation, delaying results, causing confusion, and eroding our confidence in our elections. This has no fiscal impact. It is brought by a citizen initiative attempting to override what our state legislature passed. So to be clear, voting yes keeps Colorado in the National Popular Vote Compact. This will not affect the 2020 election. Anything else? And the US Constitution gives state legislatures the power to decide how to award their state electoral votes. So, any questions here? Looks like there aren't. So shall we move on to Catherine with Prop 114? Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Proposition 114 is the reintroduction and management of gray wolves. This proposition was brought forward by the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund. It is a citizens' initiative and passes with a majority vote. If the measure passes, Colorado would develop a plan to manage and reintroduce gray wolves west of the Continental Divide by December 31st, 2023. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission would be responsible to hold public hearings and include scientific, social, and economic considerations. The commission would work in conjunction with the federal government, and the plan would meet federal guidelines before being implemented. State funds would be used to assist livestock owners in mitigating conflict with wolves and compensate owners for the loss of livestock. Historically, wolves were found throughout North America, including Colorado, but their populations were largely eliminated by hunting and trapping. The last Colorado wolf was sighted in 1945. There are now about 2,000 wolves in the northern Rocky Mountain region. Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming have successfully reintroduced and now manage their own gray wolf populations. Those in favor say this would help restore and maintain the ecological balance of our mountains. It would also ensure a permanent and healthy gray wolf population for the state. Those against say the presence of gray wolves can cause conflicts with humans and animals. And gray wolves from other states have started to appear in Colorado. Maybe it would be better for the wolf to establish its own presence here. This would also give Colorado more time to adapt to wolves. Are there any questions? So
I don't see any questions.
okay, so then Holly is going to go ahead and talk about Proposition 115.
Yes, Proposition 115 prohibits abortion after 22 weeks. It was introduced to the ballot through a citizen initiative, and it needs a simple majority to pass. Should this proposition pass, abortions after the 22-week gestational period would be prohibited in Colorado, with the exception of cases of immediate danger to the pregnant woman's life. This proposition would also create a criminal penalty for any medical professional found performing an abortion after 22 weeks. That would range from $500 to $5,000 in fines. It would be a Class 1 misdemeanor charge and a minimum 3-year suspension of their medical license by the Colorado Medical Board. The fiscal impact would be minimal. There might be some revenue due to criminal fines and court fees, but there would also be increased workload for the district attorney. Those in favor say the proposition protects viable fetal life, that the 22-week period allows the woman time to make a choice about her pregnancy, and that it accommodates for situations in which the woman's life is in danger. And finally, that it is therefore a good balance between the autonomy of the woman and humanity of the unborn child. Those opposed say this proposition is an infringement of a woman's bodily autonomy and that it interferes with patient-doctor privilege. They say the proposition does not include exceptions for non-fatal health risks, which are also important to the decision, and that it does not provide exceptions in the case of rape or incest, and that there are no exceptions in the case of fetal abnormality detected after 22 weeks, which could force the woman to carry a non-viable pregnancy to term. The registered groups behind this initiative are the Coalition for Women and Children, the Alliance for Life, End Birthday Abortions Colorado, and Coalition to Help Moms and Save Babies. As I said, Colorado is one of 6 states plus DC that does not restrict abortion after a certain gestational age. The current restrictions in this state are 3 that I found. The first is that it's not covered by insurance for public employees. Any abortion is not covered for public employees, and parents of a minor must be notified. And finally, that public funding is available only if the mother's life is endangered or in the cases of rape or incest. Do we have questions on Prop 115? Okay.
I don't see any questions, no.
If not, Peggy will return. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Holly. I'll talk about Proposition 116, which is a state income tax reduction. So this was a citizens initiative, and it reduces the state income tax rate from 4.63% to 4.55% for all taxpayers on their federal taxable income beginning January 1st, 2021, which is this next January. As I mentioned earlier, state government does not receive revenue from property taxes, and state income tax collections are the main sources of general fund revenue, although there are sales taxes also. General fund revenue is the primary source of financing state government operations. Currently, most of the money in the general fund is spent on healthcare, education, human services, and other state programs. This citizens initiative was done at least in part as a response to a competing initiative, which did not make it onto the ballot. That initiative was advocating for a progressive income tax with tax rate reductions for taxpayers making less than $250,000, and then higher rates for progressively higher incomes. So if Proposition 116 passes, revenue to state government would be reduced by about $154 million in the next fiscal year, or about 1.2% of general fund revenue. For an individual or business, the impacts would be as follows. Taxable income of $50,000, the tax would go from $2,315 to $2,275 for a savings of $40. For an income of $250,000, the savings is $200. And for an income of $1 million, the savings is $800. Those in favor say, when households and businesses are struggling to make ends meet, Proposition 116 leaves more money in the pocket of every taxpayer. Allowing taxpayers to keep more of their earnings will promote spending, business investment, and employment. And after years of growth in the state's budget, the state government can handle a small tax decrease. Those opposed say, now is not the time to reduce state revenue further. Additional loss of state revenue will cause layoffs and reduce critical state services. And most of the measure's benefits will go to only a very small population of very wealthy taxpayers, including corporations. About 75% of taxpayers will receive a tax cut of less than $50 per year. The registered groups in favor of this are Americans for Prosperity and Energize Our Economy. And the registered groups opposed are Protect Colorado's Recovery and Fair Tax Colorado. Are there any questions about this one? I seem to talk about numbers a lot on mine.
I don't see any questions.
Okay, so then we'll go to Holly next.
Okay. Proposition 117, voter approval for certain new state enterprises. A yes vote will require voter approval for new state government enterprises with estimated fee revenue of over $100 million in the first 5 years. A no vote retains the state legislature's authority to create new enterprises. This would pass with a simple majority vote. To define a state enterprise, that's a government-owned business which may issue bonds and receives less than 10% of its annual revenue from state and local governments combined. Most of its revenue is from providing a good or service. Some examples of existing state enterprises are the Division of Wildlife, the Colorado Lottery, higher education institutions, correctional industries, and the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund. There are currently 22 state-run enterprises. These entities charge fees for services from the people using those services, and the revenue does not go into the state's general fund. Many counties and municipalities also operate enterprises, and this proposition would not affect them. Money collected by an enterprise is not subject to the Tabor revenue limits. And the state enterprises are already evaluated each year to ensure that they continue to meet the above requirements. Those in favor say that the legislature is using enterprises to grow its budget without voter approval, and that in 2018, state enterprise fee revenues were more than double what they were in 2008 on a per capita basis, as total revenue from enterprise fees has grown faster than the general fund revenue. Those opposed say enterprises were specifically exempted from spending restrictions in Tabor, and that enterprises shift the cost of some government services to only those who use or benefit from the service, or to those that create a need for a service. For example, the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund that helps clean up sites contaminated from petroleum storage tanks in exchange for a fee from tank operators. The fiscal impact was not quantified, but there would be a slight increase in workload for some state agencies to come up with these revenue estimates. I should also say that if the legislature creates an enterprise that initially is estimated to make below the $100 million threshold, but then it does generate revenue over that, we would have to vote on it. This is a citizen initiative. The supporting registered group is Colorado Rising State Action. And the newest enterprise created was last year, 2019. And that's the Front Range Waste Diversion Enterprise under the Department of Public Health. And it collects a user fee on each load of waste disposed of at a landfill in the Front Range to finance the Front Range Waste Diversion Grant Program, to give you an example of something recent. Do we have any questions on this one?
No, I don't believe so. It looks like we do have somebody asked if Peggy might summarize the Amendment B one more time. I think that one seems to be the most confusing, as we learned in our first presentation for voters. So I think we're okay time-wise, Peggy, if you could maybe spend a minute or two, especially probably the arguments for and against. And I'll go back to that slide for you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so basically it takes away the Gallagher Amendment. And that is the one that has this complicated formula and has resulted in lower residential property taxes. And so the effect next year is that the residential assessment rate will go down to 5.88% instead of the current 7.15% if Amendment B doesn't pass. So if Amendment B does pass, then the residential rate will stay at 7.15%. And the effect on individual taxpayers is that their assessment rate stays the same, but if their property values go up, then their property taxes will go up. And then as far as the effect on school districts, if Amendment B is passed, then that will prevent about almost $500 million in cuts to school district budgets next year, and about $200 million in cuts to county governments. And then as far as the state government, it would save the state government about $250 million in school funding obligations. So those in favor say that the Gallagher Amendment is outdated and full of unintended consequences. It was passed in 1982. It uses statewide averages of real estate values that ignore the difference between urban and rural Colorado. And by repealing the Gallagher Amendment, we can maintain the funding we need for critical services such as local schools, fire departments, water services, and others. And those opposed say Amendment B results in higher property taxes for homeowners. The current property tax system keeps residential property taxes low. And there are better alternatives to amending the Constitution. Local governments can instead ask their voters to raise tax rates or find other solutions to provide services. These alternatives would allow voters in each jurisdiction to decide for themselves how to best fund services for their community. So after hearing that again, are there other questions?
It looks like there is one question, and it says, I'm confused about the effect to schools. It keeps their tax benefit up, but it decreases the amount of money the state will give schools. Does that result in net loss to schools?
All right, so no. So the state government is required to fill a gap between a requirement and then what the local districts collect. And so since the local districts will not lose about $500 million, then it will save the state government about $250 million in trying to fill that gap. So the local school districts would not have a decrease, and then the state government just doesn't need to fill in as much of a hole. But the local governments still receive their amount that they're receiving now.
She says, thank you.
All right. Oh, so I guess we should move on to our Longmont issues. So Catherine is our first one on that.
We need to do 118.
Oh, so we do. Sorry, Charles.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Getting there now on the slides. And again, if people have questions towards the end and we have a few minutes before things end, we can try to answer any other questions that sneak up. Go ahead.
Proposition 118 is titled Paid Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. This was placed on the ballot by a citizens initiative and would pass by a majority vote if it passes. It proposes amending Colorado statutes to create a paid family and medical leave insurance program for Colorado employees administered by the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. It requires employers and employees in Colorado to pay a payroll premium to finance this particular insurance program beginning in January 1st, 2023. It would allow eligible employees up to 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave insurance benefits annually beginning January 1st, 2024. And it creates job protections for employees who take paid family and medical leave. A yes vote would create the insurance program. A no vote means it would not. This would be a state program. It is structured similarly to the federal program called the Family Medical Leave Act. However, this proposition would fund people taking leave under that, where the federal program does not require employers to pay wages, simply to administer the program. If it passes, it would create the state paid or state-run paid family and medical leave insurance program. I would point out that this is an insurance program. To care and the people, an eligible employee may take leave for the following reasons under this program: to care for their own serious health condition, to care for a newborn for the first year of birth, adoption or placement through foster care of that child, to care for a family member with a serious health condition. When a family member is on medical or is on active duty military service or being called to active duty military service, and when an individual or the individual's family member is a victim of domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault. The program, the eligibility is very similar and mirrors the federal program, with the exception of the final point, which is the individual or family member a victim of domestic abuse, stalking, or sexual assault. Both employers and employees would pay into this insurance program. The amount an employee will receive during the leave is based on the employee's average weekly wage, and they must be employed at least 180 days for them to be eligible for this program. The program would pay for up to 12 weeks of leave. There's provision for an additional 4 weeks based on a complicated pregnancy. The maximum benefit would be $1,100 a week in wages, and the employee would be protected by to keep their job and benefits. The premium would be based on 0.9% of the employee's wage, at least 50% paid by the employer, and the other 50% paid by the employee. Currently, the federal program provides the similar protections and benefits, protections, but not a paid benefit. The state mandated sick leave program provides up to 6 days of paid leave. This program would pay for through the insurance program, up to 12 weeks of paid leave based on eligibility. The program, if approved and implemented, would pay out if the employee's wage was $500 weekly, which translates to a $26,000 annual wage. The employer annual premium would be $117. The employees would be the same, $117 as well. Moving on up the scale, just to give you an example, if the weekly wages for the employee were $1,500 That would amount to an annual wage of $78,000. And the employer would pay $351, while the employee would also pay a $351 premium. The program maxes out at the $1,100 payment. There are some exceptions to this. Employers with 9 or fewer employees could opt out of the program. Self-employed individuals could opt out of the program. Local governments could decline to participate, and employers that already offer approved paid leave benefits that are equivalent, at least equivalent or better than what is proposed by this insurance program could also opt out. Arguments for the proposition is that paid leave would have a positive impact on the health of Colorado families, especially new parents and those with health issues, because they would be more likely to take leave because they would receive payment, as opposed to not if they had no other benefits available to them, like paid vacation or paid sick leave. Paid leave would increase employment opportunities and benefit the state's economy by employees having access to a paid benefit. The opposition says that the measure creates a financial and regulatory burden on employers to navigate the complex requirements. They also feel that it would create a large bureaucracy because the program would be administered through the Department of Labor and Employment. Some estimates show that it would take as many as 200 new employees in the Department of Labor to administer this particular insurance program. Also, those against the Proposition 118 say that it requires employees to pay into a program they may never when they may never use the benefit. And they can ill afford that when they're already struggling to make payments and to get paid in this economy. Are there any questions?
We had one question on eligible employees, but it looks like you answered that one. So
okay,
I think we are good to move on.
I had one thing to say. I misspoke. Shall I go ahead with, before we go on to the cities?
Sure.
I was on C, the bingo amendment. That requires a 55% yes vote to pass. And then the rule is a constitutional amendment takes 55% vote to pass unless it's repealing something. So we have 4 amendments. Amendment B is repealing the 45-55, so it requires a simple majority. The bingo, Amendment C, requires 55%. 76 requires 55%, the citizen qualifications, but 77, the casinos, since it's just repealing something, requires simple majority. I know that's a small point, but I didn't want to leave an error. Thanks.
Thank you. It looks like we're ready to move on to the City of Longmont ballot question 3C.
So I'm going to talk about ballot question 3C. It's the revenue bonds for funding water system improvements in the City of Longmont. This was referred to voters by City Council as required by the city charter. If the measure passes, the city would borrow up to $80 million to improve Longmont's water system, including the expansion of the Nelson Flanders water treatment plant and replace aging infrastructure such as transmission lines. Debt will be paid with funds generated by the city's water utility enterprise. The city charter requires voter approval to issue revenue bonds for any public purpose. So some background about this ballot question. This is a proposal that the City Council unanimously supports. Improving Longmont's water has been a multi-step process. The Newton Flanders treatment plant was built in 2005 in anticipation of the Wade Gaddis facility built in 1983 becoming inadequate. Now, new planned improvements, such as the expansion and replacing infrastructure, will ensure clean water as a matter of public health and compliance with federal law. In 2019, City Council approved a 5-year rate schedule for the city's water utility enterprise based on selling bonds and paying the debt over several years. Those in favor say, city engineers believe this is the most efficient and economical way to transition from an aging system to a newer system. There are 3 reasons why bond financing is a good idea. The costs of improvements are spread out over time, which avoid rate spikes and makes costs for users more predictable. Bond financing results in lower initial rates, and financing allows improvements to be made in the near future instead of when funds become available. Many of the improvements are required by the federal government, such as the Safe Drinking Water Act. And finally, short-term, less expensive repairs are unlikely to extend the life of the existing water system at a level required by regulations. Those against say, in the long run, residents will pay more due to the interest on the bond, and the city should not go into debt to fund a project of this type. COVID-19 has made life unpredictable, and now is not the time to issue bonds. Short-term, less expensive repairs may extend the life of the water infrastructure system, and better ways can be found to maintain older systems in conjunction with the newer one. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions just yet, Catherine.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Peggy, and she's going to talk about 3D.
All right, thank you, Catherine. 3D in Longmont is to allow up to a 30-year lease. So as required by the city's charter, this ballot question has been referred to the voters by City Council. The proposal would expand the maximum term of leases of city property from 20 years to 30 years. This issue was on last year's ballot too in 2019 and failed by approximately 45 to 55%. Although it was voted down last year, the proposal has acquired greater support in the community, and it has the support of City Council, the Longmont Chamber of Commerce, the Longmont Downtown Development Authority, and the Longmont Economic Development Partnership. Those in favor say city services are often provided more cheaply by private business, such as solar farms to provide low-cost solar energy, art centers for the development of local talent, and affordable housing for the average worker in Longmont. And the term of lease should be as long as the bank loan, in most cases 30 years. Nationally, the typical term of lease rates are now running 30 to 50 years. So these rates over a longer term can turn a struggling business into a thriving one. Those in favor also say that the proposal involves management of assets at no cost to taxpayers. A 30-year lease is more attractive to businesses, so city property is less likely to stand empty, which is a financial loss for the city. Those opposed say a 20-year lease yields greater profit for the city due to more frequent turnover. A decade extension of a lease on city-owned property could adversely affect the city's financial position. They also say a revision or amendment to the city charter opens the prospect of further revisions to Longmont's basic governing document by the less stringent process of popular petitions. And those opposed also say this measure is a pro-business giveaway. There is one registered group in favor, which is called Our Best Longmont. Are there any questions on this proposition, or I guess it's not a ballot question in Longmont?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, then we'll hear from Charles on our Louisville issue.
This City of Louisville ballot question 2A, it's a disposable bag tax. It is a tax for single-use single-use bags beginning on 1/1/2022. The tax would be up to 25 cents per disposable bag. That would be either paper and or plastic. Applies to all retailers in Louisville. Retailers retain 10 cents per bag for implementation expenses. Some exceptions apply, such as bags for bulk items, bakery items, newspaper bags, dry cleaning bags. Those in favor state that this is a low-hanging fruit which would help reduce waste. That life cycle assessments show that the life cycle of plastic and paper bags is significant and produces greenhouse gas emissions. And many consumers already have reusable bags. Those opposed say single-use bags are really not a significant litter issue. They are not a large part of the local waste stream, and they can be used for other purposes. Are there any questions?
Nope, I do not see any questions for this one. So if anyone has questions about something we have already presented, the Louisville is the last city issue. So you're welcome to type in the chat. I do not see any. I'm going to go ahead and put the next slide up.
All right, so the League of Women Voters envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. And so we hope by participating in today's webinar that you have developed some knowledge and some confidence in filling out your ballots. So the ballots were mailed out, started being mailed out on Friday. I already received mine yesterday. So voters may complete it and return it by mail, or they can take it to a drop-off location. Those drop-off locations are included with the ballot. They have a list of the locations. A mailed ballot, or actually any ballot, must be received by 7 p.m. on November 3rd. So if you mail it, you want to make sure you mail it at least a week in advance to make sure that it'll get there. If you haven't, then you should find a drop box or deliver it to a voter center or something like that. I think that's, Mandy, do you talk about what's on our website and stuff?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Peggy.
All right.
Thank you again for everyone joining us today. I just want to share on behalf of the League, I would like to thank you all for participating. These are challenging times, and all the more reason to ensure a strong democratic process that engages as many community members as possible. Colorado has one of the most efficient and accessible voting processes in the country, so let's use it and vote. Thanks for your participation and for encouraging your family members, friends, and neighbors to pay attention to important issues affecting our community. Check out our league voter information website, vote411.org, for election information you need. You type in your address there and you will have access to personalized ballot info. We have asked candidates in the Boulder County area running to submit questions or answers to the questions on Vote 411, so you can compare candidates side by side, as well as get the pro-con information we mentioned earlier for the ballot issues. So thank you again for everyone for joining us, and we appreciate your time today.